The Christian world was shocked with allegations of sexual misconduct in America's largest denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention. Amid the allegations and the back and forth within the convention, questions have arisen like, why do these things happen among leaders and among Christian leaders? And how ought leaders behave themselves? Questions that all of us would do well to look within and ask ourselves. In the aftermath of this scandal, where does the Southern Baptist Convention go next? And how can we as leaders learn lessons from everything that's occurred? Daniel Darling is the director of the Land Center for Cultural Engagement at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and he joins us to talk about those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. Not too long ago, the Christian world and much of the world in general was shocked with the allegations of sexual misconduct by a number of leaders and pastors in America's largest Christian denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention. While news of this made national and international headlines, it also behooves us as leaders, whether Christian or not, to ask questions of how should leaders behave? Why do things like this happen? And what lessons can all of us learn from the events that unfolded? We're joined tonight by Daniel Darling. He is the director of the Land Center for Cultural Engagement at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He is an acclaimed author and the host of the Way Home podcast. Dan, welcome to Face the Issues. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Sam, and just delighted to be on here to talk with you about this very sobering issue.
And thank you for joining. And you're right, it's a very, very sobering topic and certainly not a conversation that any of us want to be having. And yet, in so many ways, an imperative conversation, especially if we can learn from these past mistakes. And to just start and kind of set the tone, I want to ask if you could just help summarize for our viewers. We don't need to go into any explicit details, but just summarize what unfolded. How did this become news? And where does it stand now with the Southern Baptist Convention?
Well, you have to go back a number of years. You know, there have been various reports over the number of years about incidents of sexual abuse in churches and in some institutions by pastors and pastors who or youth pastors or people associated with a church going back really a couple of decades. And for some time, those survivors were either some were listened to, some were not, some were sort of marginalized in many ways. Some of the cases were adjudicated in the court of law, some were not, and it sort of bubbled up to the surface in the last number of years, where more and more people were really calling on the Southern Baptist Convention as an entity, as a convention, to really address this holistically. And so it began a couple of years ago. When I was at the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission under Russell Moore, we initiated a program called Caring Well, where we really helped equip pastors and church leaders how to deal with sexual abuse in their midst when it happens, how to report, how to counsel, how to care for survivors, how to prevent sexual abuse of children. But then there was a series of events that led really to a kind of a major tipping point, I would say, in the last year or 2 years, where actually the Southern Baptist Convention that gathered in first in Nashville and then in last year in California, in Anaheim, the messengers themselves came to the convention and really demanded that the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention, which really had not really taken seriously enough these allegations, that they really do more. And there was a report last year that was that came out, a report that the Southern Baptist Convention messengers actually asked for in Nashville. They asked for this a third party organization to investigate the executive committee's handling of sexual abuse. And that report came out really before the convention this summer, and really caused the messengers to come back to the convention and say, we want you to initiate a series of steps to put together a task force. So there's really two task forces. There was one that was tasked with investigating, and that task force was given by the messengers independent authority and funding. They contracted with Guideposts, which is a reputable firm that investigates these things. And then once that report came out, messengers at the convention went back to the convention and asked that a task force be put together to implement new procedures and guidelines, not only for prevention, but also for handling of cases. And so there's been a real uprising from the messengers themselves to ask our entities and bodies to take this seriously.
Yeah, that's a great sum of events, Dan. For our viewers who are not Southern Baptists, what is the SBC, which stands for Southern Baptist Convention? What is the SBC Executive Committee, and who are the messengers?
So for people that are not familiar with the SBC, I think a lot of people look at the SBC like they might look at another denomination or another faith tradition like the Catholic Church, and assume that it's a hierarchical denomination. In truth, the Southern Baptist Convention is the most democratic denomination really in the world, and in the sense that every church is considered, the headquarters of the SBC, people say, is not in Nashville, but it's in every local church. That local churches have autonomy, and that we partner together for mission, and we pool our money together for institutions like the seminary that I'm a part of, for our mission boards, for the ERLC, and for other state conventions and other joint work. But so we have a very democratic polity, and we meet once a year as a convention to vote on things, to make changes. And so the executive committee is really the body that is kind of like the home office of the SBC, that is tasked with kind of distributing funding to from the cooperative program and things like that. They also receive some of these complaints about sexual abuse. And so the messengers ask them to really take this seriously when evaluating churches, when evaluating policies.
And the messengers then are I'm assuming, are like delegates to the convention. They come from each of the churches. They're almost like, to borrow your example, like voting members of Congress.
Absolutely. And every church, based on their size and based on their, essentially based on their size, is allocated a number of delegates and to the convention, and based on a number of factors, not just the attendance. And so, they're ordinary pastors and lay leaders who come every year and come and vote on a number of things. And so they're the ones that really demanded change in the SBC.
Dan, let me ask you this. You mentioned the report that came out before this past summer's meeting in Anaheim. I've read that report. It was very long, and it was quite damning of a number of leaders high up in the SBC. It was also, in many ways, complimentary of some other leaders and some of the past presidents of the SBC who cooperated and who did well and served well. I mean, you read that report. You mentioned your old boss, Russell Moore, was very frustrated when that report came out. He was very public about this. How do things, you look at a group of leaders, Christian leaders in this case, but any group of leaders, how do these things happen? I have a hard time imagining a leader wakes up one day and says, what moral ethics or what laws can I break today, and proceeds to do that. How does this occur that it rises to this level? How does that happen with leaders?
Well, I think there's a number of things. First of all, like you, when I read the report in full when it came out, and I had two responses. My first response was just being really sickened to my stomach and really ashamed, even though I love being Southern Baptist. I've served Southern Baptist institutions. I'm a Southern Baptist pastor. Ashamed and sickened by what I read. As the people of God, as messengers of the gospel, the church should be the safest place for members to come, particularly the most vulnerable children. And to think that there were really, you have to call them wolves. Pastors who abuse their authority to prey on people is sickening. It's sickening that leaders at all levels try to cover this up or not take it seriously. So that was my first response. Just really disturbed by it. My second response was, I'm glad that we're in a democratic, we have a democratic polity, which can sometimes be difficult, but it also means that because our people demanded this report, we got this and it was out in the open. And it's good that this was exposed. It's good that this report came out, even though it's embarrassing and damaging. And then you ask, how could leaders do this? Well, I think we're seeing this at all levels of society. Our convention is not the only denomination that's dealing with this particular issue. The Anglican Church is dealing with it. The Catholic churches deal with it, and many other denominations. We're one of the biggest, so we probably make the headlines more than others. But I think there's a couple of reasons leaders do this. I think number one, we have to say there was a lack of education on how to deal with these things. That's not an excuse, but I think that's what happened, especially when you go back decades ago. But I think number two, sometimes Christian leaders can be so worried about protecting the reputation of the body that we sort of get into this mode where we don't want to hear bad news. We don't want to deal with bad news. We don't want to take steps that might initially be bad PR, but is wrong is right in the long run. And so we sort of get into this protect mode instead of really serving as shepherds and stewards of the institutions God given us. Look, the Southern Baptist Convention is has a great tradition. It's a great group of churches cooperating for the sake of the gospel. But God is not beholden to the SBC. And if we don't steward this opportunity well, God could give his blessing. He could say that I'm going to use other people. And so we have to be really serious about that and have transparency and accountability. Leaders need to be held accountable. And I think this is a sobering wake-up call for all of us.
Dan, one of the things you just said there about how sometimes we think about our immediate reputation or a PR message over doing the right thing in the long term, that sounds like that separates what a lot of these successful leaders that we see in the SBC and that even the report mentions from those that were indicted by this report. I think that what you just summed up the difference between those two kinds of leaders.
Yeah, it really does. And I think the good news is, the messengers have forced change, and the SBC is taking this seriously. There's a task force put together of pastors and experts from around the country from within the SBC that's helping shape this and really helping to help individual churches know how to handle this issue and become safe places. Every entity is taking it seriously, and there's new leadership at the executive committee. There's new leadership even on the executive committee board, and they are committed to really taking this seriously and making sure that, when there are credible reports, they're handled well, they're not pushed under the rug, and that pastors who abuse their authority cannot move from church to church without, that churches notify each other, and that, there's a list, a database of folks that shouldn't be hired, that and I think people are taking seriously the duty to report that when there's a credible accusation of sexual abuse, the first duty is to report to law enforcement. We understand there's a difference between what the civil authorities are tasked by God with doing and with what the church is tasked. And I think pastors and churches are getting educated on how to do this, but we have to take it seriously. We have a ways to go, and it's a sober moment for all of us, really.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight into that. Dan, we're going to cut to commercial break. When we come back, I want to talk about where we go from here and what leaders can learn from this experience. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. My guest again is Dan Darling. Dan, thank you again for joining us. I wanted to pivot a little bit in our conversation here. You gave such good insight into the problem of why these things occur, not just in the Southern Baptist Convention, but in different organizations and with leaders in general. I want to talk a little bit about how do we prevent these things from happening? you teach you do teaching at the college. You're involved with the Center for Cultural Engagement, the Land Center at the Seminary. You've been with different organizations in high positions of leadership. In your experience, what advice do you give to, say, leaders or young pastors or people who are even involved volunteer in ministry or otherwise about how do they avoid situations like this? How should they conduct themselves in the way that, as Scripture tells us, they should be beyond reproach?
Well, I think we have to first acknowledge that we are in a fallen world, and we have to be proactive and knowing that there's evil in the world. And those of us who are tasked with stewarding institutions and leading them need to understand that we need to take every step we can to make sure we protect and guard our institutions from those who would prey on the most vulnerable. And this means, not having your head in the sand, but being really proactive. And there's some really important and good tools out there. Want to mention a few. The Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission partnered with Lifeway on a tool called Caring Well. And there's a whole suite of resources that help educate churches and church leaders on how to really create safe environments. And these scale from whether you're a big mega church or a small church, which most of our churches are. There's also groups like Ministry Safe and others that do this work, and others that are similar that will come help evaluate your environment and do that. And then there's an organization called the Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention, ECAP. That is a new organization that will help do an audit of your environment and help you. But I think we have to be humble as pastors and know and understand what we don't know, and say that we want to lean on those who understand about abuse prevention. We want to go above and beyond to prevent it. We want to make environments that are safe. We have children and parents coming into our church buildings all around the country, and 99.9% of those churches are safe and they're proactive. But we don't want to take anything for granted. We don't want to be lax on this. This is a very important issue. We have to raise the level of this issue as we would anything else, and not treat it as an afterthought, but something that we're proactive about.
Yeah, Dan, and let me ask you this as well then. I mean, I think that's fantastic advice, especially for people who are in good churches or in healthy positions of leadership, of how you safeguard yourself. We're all humans, we're all sinners. We can't ever get so arrogant as to think it will never happen to us. On the other side of it, where the Southern Baptist Convention is now, or you are a pastor who has committed a sin like this, or you are a pastor where something like this happened in your church or happened in your organization, how do you respond? There seems to have been two narratives that came out of the last SBC meeting. One, which was delivered by the bulk of the messengers, of accountability is necessary, that there are certain people who commit sins like this who are no longer fit for ministry, should not continue to hold a position in the pulpit. And there's another perspective, which is this is distracting from the word of the gospel, that by doing this, we're giving the church a black eye. We're giving the name of Christ a black eye. We need to move on from this. How do you parse between those narratives? Or is there one that's right and one that's wrong? And what advice would you give the SBC in handling this from where they are now?
Well, I think to the first part of your question, we do believe in a God of repentance and restitution, or a God of redemption and restitution. However, what that restoration looks like is different in different scenarios. And there are some people, particularly those who have preyed on children, who, even though there's forgiveness, we can't trust them to be around children. We can't entrust our precious resource of our children around people who have a history of that. And so I think that's one thing to consider. I think number two, the idea that talking about sexual abuse and talking about of children and this kind of heinous evil and sin is not a distraction from our mission. It's part of our mission. Jesus said that woe to those who prey on children. They better to have a millstone around your neck and go into the sea. This is part of our mission. If people can't trust our churches to be safe for their children, they're not going to be able to come and have an audience to hear the gospel. And the good news is our churches are taking it seriously, and pastors are taking it seriously. So you can trust that this is the case. But It's not a distraction. It's part of our mission. We are, as pastors, are shepherds. First Peter says, to shepherd the flock of God that is among you, that we are to care for people.
Mm-hmm.
And bad shepherds let wolves come in and destroy people. Good shepherds guard the gate and make sure that their people are safe and lead them to places of flourishing.
Dan, let me ask you this. One of the groups that is at the center of all of this that we haven't talked about yet are the victims and those who have been tragically abused by people in positions of leadership, oftentimes people they trust. Some of these are people who I know personally who are friends of mine. I know you talked with many of these victims. What do you say to them? I mean, as they're watching all of this unfold, what do you say to them?
Well, I think the first thing we have to say as a convention, and I believe we have attempted to do that, and we could do this more, is we're sorry, and we have messed up. We have sinned in that we have not taken this issue seriously. The wounds and the hurt and the pain that survivors bear are unbelievable. Diane Langberg, who is a renowned expert on the trauma of sexual abuse, talks about the combination of sexual abuse when it happens in religious context. It really is a lethal combination because it really tears away at people's trust, not only in the church, but more importantly in God, in the gospel. And so I think our first response has to be repentance and apologies. And we've had moments of repentance and times of apologizing to victims. We're also, I believe, the Southern Baptist Convention and through the Sexual Abuse Task Force and some of those initiatives is working on helping to provide counseling and care for those victims. And so, but really, none of it's going to be enough, in terms of our ability to say sorry to those who've really been hurt.
Yeah. Dan, that's great, a great word. And I know you have spoken a lot of truth and love, both to those who have been victims, as well as to those who have been the perpetrators of this, and the idea of redemption and forever trying to see their redemption and their restoration. I just want to thank you for your insights, but also I know I've seen and watched you lead in this way of being that voice of Christ, and I want to thank you for doing that as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, Sam, and really great to come on here and talk to you about these issues.
Yeah, same. We're going to cut the break. We'll come back with the close it out, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Again, my guest is Dan Darling. And Dan, thank you again for joining us. We said from the start, very sobering conversation. I'm grateful that you're willing to have it, and so many great insights for our leaders today on how we ought to behave and act in this world, and I appreciate that. So much of what we talked about does also fold right into this idea of cultural engagement. And I think a lot of times when we think about cultural engagement, whether from a religious perspective or otherwise, we think of hot button political issues, but so much of engaging our culture goes beyond politics. I often think of politics as an output of how we engage our culture. And toward the end, this is the work that you're doing at the Land Center for Cultural Engagement. So what does the center do? What is your job like? And how do you see and encourage this kind of cultural engagement amid all the struggle that we see in the world?
Well, I'm excited to lead the Land Center. It's named after our namesake, Richard Land, who was at ERLC president for 25 years and as a distinguished Baptist leader. And one of the things we're trying to do is really help equip the next generation of Christians to answer the question, what does it look like to live faithfully as a Christian in contemporary America in 2022? And what does it look like to steward my vote and my politics, to steward my voice? How can I get involved in all levels of culture, whether it's art or science or business or other things? What does that look like? And so I teach in the college. We have a faith and culture concentration to equip people that way. We also host conversations and lecture series. We have a fellows program with leading and distinguished scholars from around the country who are answering a lot of these questions. And we want to put forward what we believe is a distinctly Baptist way of engaging the world, where we believe in a free church and a free state, but we also encourage Christians to bring their faith to the public square and to inform public policy. And so we're really excited about what we get to do and what God has called us to do here and helping equip and train the next generation.
And Dan, you've served in a number of different capacities. You've been at the ERA LC, you've been at the National Religious Broadcasters, and now you're here at the Land Center. Somebody you're a podcast host, you're an author, you're well respected, not just in the Christian community, but throughout. I'm grateful for you joining me here. I mean, I've seen you on Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough, and so to come into, essentially my doghouse here, I'm deeply grateful for that. But as you journey through and as you work in so many different sectors, what's the best advice you can give for leaders today to navigate this world and as they look to engage it culturally?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think number one, leaders have to understand that when you go into leadership, you're operating at a deficit of trust because people really have lost faith in institutions across our society, whether it's media, whether it's government, education, business. And so you have to understand that. And I think number two, being very transparent about what you're doing. Number three, I think being willing to, be relational. And sometimes there can be a gap between the leadership class and those that they lead. And so leaders who avoid condescension, who avoid sort of speaking down to the people they lead, but who, people are willing to hear hard words and be led if they know that you are one of them. And so I think all those things matter, and really seeing leadership as service, not as a way to empower and enrich the leader, but to empower and help people flourish, those who you are leading.
Seeing leadership as service, fantastic advice for us to end on. Dan Darling, thank you again for joining us, for your insights and for all that you do.
Well, thank you, Sam, for having me. It's a delight to be on here with you and really appreciate the work that you're doing here.
I appreciate that. We'll look to have you again in the future. Again, my thanks to Dan Darling, Director of the Land Center for Cultural Engagement at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And my thanks to each of you for tuning us for this conversation. Hope to see you right back here again next week. Until then, my name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.